We're going to talk more about flowers now. I'm standing back here in case you want to stop the video and take notes on some of this stuff, but I'll go closer for some of the smaller writing here. So the flowers are basically modified branches, and we've kind of talked about this before in lab, and sort of shown you how this might have occurred. But anyway, they're coming from the leaf axils, so it's a bud that would, instead of becoming a leaf or a branch, is going to become a flower. They are determinate, much like leaves are. That is, they grow to a certain size, shape, and that is related to the species. And they have a certain duration. That is how long they are going to last and when they are coming out, etc. And that, of course, is hormonally and genetically controlled, like we talked about previously. Monocots have flower parts in threes, and eudicots have flower parts in fours and fives. The flower structure is, this is kind of a diagrammatic view of flower structure. Notice that these are in groups of threes, so this would be a monocot. In this drawing, though, it's kind of hard to tell what's going on because the sepals and petals are the same color. So sometimes, I'm showing you this because sepals oftentimes are the same color, whereas sometimes they are just green. So like, for example, if you looked at a rose, the bud on the outside of the rose, or before the rose opens up, the green stuff that is sort of enclosing the flower would be the sepals, and then the colored part would be the petals. In this case, the sepals and petals are both colored. The sepals are going to be on the outside, and the petals are on the inside. So if you think of a modified branch, the first set of leaves are going to be the sepals, and the second set of leaves are going to be the petals. The third set of leaves are going to be the stamen, which is this part. That is the male reproductive part. And the fourth set of leaves is going to be the carpel, and this is the female part. So we will go over a little more about this in just a second. Okay, so an inflorescence is just like a group of flower clusters. That is more than one flower on a stalk, or you can just have a single flower. And the peduncle is the stalk that is holding the inflorescence, and the pedicel is the stalk of each individual flower of the inflorescence. The receptacle is the part of the stalk that holds the flower. So just to kind of go over those parts with a real flower here, let me just put this down on a white sheet of paper so you can kind of see. So if I looked at this, this of course is going to be the stalk, or what we call the peduncle, okay? And then the pedicel would be this, leading up to the individual flowers. Actually, in this case, it's like it's a compound pedicels. These would also be called pedicels, like secondary pedicels. This whole thing is an inflorescence. The receptacle would be the part that's like down here right before the inflorescence starts. Okay, so the types of inflorescences are shown in this diagram. This diagram is also in your lab book. And you can see that in the way they're depicting this, the big thing is the most mature flowers, or the biggest ball, so to speak. And then the smaller ones are the less mature flowers. So in this case, the ones on the end are the most mature, and the ones on the bottom are the most mature, and the least mature are the ones that are near the top. That was kind of like what we just saw, which this flower type is called a panicle. Okay. If in a spike, the flowers are coming directly off the stalk. In a raceme, they have a stalk and the most mature flowers on the bottom, but there's only one flower per peduncle, or pedicel, I'm sorry. In this case, in a cyme, same thing, but the more mature flowers are at the top. So the raceme and cyme are very similar. It's just the mature flowers are in different locations. An umbel is looks like a flower head. In other words, it's kind of flat across the top. The most mature flowers on the outside, least mature in the middle. A corium looks the same, except for that it has the pedicels coming off at different locations or alternate locations as opposed to one single point. You can have a head where you have a huge receptacle that is holding individual flowers that are, each of them would have their own carpels and stamens and so forth, like up here. And that's called a head. It's like a sunflower. And in this case, this is a compound umbel. That would be, I have many of those, right? And then you have a catkin. Catkins are just flowers that hang like wisteria, all right? So those are the different types of inflorescences. So let's go over the flower parts again. So I'll put this flower structure back up, and we can refer to it now and then. But you want to make sure that you write down all of these things, okay? So sepals and petals are on the outside. Like I was saying, the sepals are generally speaking green, but sometimes they can be colored, like in the drawing. That is also called the calyx, and the petals are the corolla. So the corolla is the colored part, almost always a color of some sort, but it could be white or black, which I guess you could say is not a color. I mean, they are, but white especially is all colors reflected off of there, right? Anyway, these are the sterile parts, the parts that are not reproductive, and it's also called the perianth. Now, the fertile parts, the parts that are the reproductive parts, are the stamen, which comes first, and those are the male parts. They are also more technically called the androcium, or the microsporophyll, which is written over here. And the carpel is the gynosium. That's referring to the female part. It's also called the megasporophyll. Okay, so this is a little bit more about each one of those. So the stamen has a filament and an anther. The anther is the part that contains the pollen sacs, which are also called microsporangia, that are found in the microsporophyll. The microsporophyll is referring to the structure. The sporangia is referring to the cells that are going to give rise to the microspore that is going to be the pollen grain. Okay, so the carpel, and later on when you do life cycles in botany too, you're going to talk a lot more about that. So this is just kind of an introduction. The carpel is the megasporophyll. It contains the ovules. The ovules are the megasporangia that have the megaspore that is going to become the actual, it's going to be like the part that gets fertilized and becomes the baby plant. So later. And one carpel is just a single carpel, but if you have more than one carpel, and this happens fairly frequently, where they are fused, it is called a pistil. So those two terms are sometimes used interchangeably. But you normally, like if I just had a single one, it would look like this. I would have a stigma at the top, style, which is the stalk that's leading down into the ovary. And inside the ovary are going to be the ovules. Now the spaces around the ovules are called the locules. So basically this is just a space. We'll look more at that in just a second. Going back to this diagram, so just to kind of put it in perspective, just the male parts in particular. So we have then the anther and the filament that is holding the anther up, and those are both part of the stamen. And then you have the stigma, style, and ovary that are part of the carpel, and inside the ovary is going to be the ovule or ovules. There can be many of those parts. Okay. Now,